Good morning. This is Friends of Liberty radio show. Byron Dale, host. We have a very interesting guest this morning, J.P. Williams. He hasn't called in just yet, but I'm sure he will in just a few minutes. So the show will be about some legislation that him and others have proposed to called the Balance of Freedom Powers. It's a law that be passed in the states that basically says that we, the states, have the right to decide what is constitutional and what isn't for us, and the federal government is not the only one that has the right to say what is constitutional. They started this movement somewhat back in the 90s called the 10th Amendment resolutions, and it went around a lot of the different states, and several of the states passed it. California, I know for sure, did, and some others. Only that was just a resolution. It did not actually address give the states any real authority to do anything. It just kind of begged the federal government to please stop doing some of the things they're doing. And this looks to me like it's so much better, and I'm anxious to for JB to get on. We had a few difficulties this morning. I'm kind of new at this, and I didn't do something right, and the people in California that run it didn't do something, and therefore our show got postponed for 30 minutes. But it's going to go, and I think it just won't be now but a few minutes.
Hello?
JB? Hello?
Byron,
this is
Byron Airline here. I'm on.
Okay. Well,
can you hear me?
Hadn't called. Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I just didn't know if I was on or not.
Yeah, you are. And
okay.
I've introduced the show, and we're waiting now for JP. Judy just went to call him again to make sure he understood that we was going to go on at just 10:30 instead of 9:30. So I'm sure he'll be on in just a few minutes. Just a second. I've got it. What'd you find out? J.P. Williams, that number, right? No, called the bottom one. Oh, I'm sorry, dear. It's amazing. You know, I can stand up in front of a whole crowd of people and talk and not even faze me at all. I do little things like this or speak up in a meeting, and I just get nervous as the dickens. Not that I can't go ahead and perform and talk, but it's amazing how nervous I get to do some of this kind of stuff. I never really realized that till just the last couple of weeks, where I get just so comprehensive that everything won't go right. Sometimes it doesn't. So
well, we're here to support you, Byron.
Well, and I'm sure, and I thought Greg was going to call in too, but he hasn't yet. But he may be listening too. So. Did you get a chance to read the bill yourself, too, then?
I did.
Well, it looks pretty good, doesn't it? And I
really
like it.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I liked it. I thought it was pretty succinct. I'm going to tweak a few words, but that's the the English in me.
Is he calling, just a second, what number did you call to get in? You called 347.
884
9499.
Right.
And our airline got in on it. He can't get in?
That was no problem calling in today.
If he don't get in, call back and I'll have you call Keith. He said he's going to try one more time, but he can't get in. He wants to reschedule. That's fine. I guess that's no problem. Are you talking to airline now? Yeah. Are you on the air? Yes, I'm on the air. So we're just, we've had some difficulties here, and I don't know. Now, JB, I just contacted him, and he can't call in on the number. So I don't know what's going on. Because they surely let more than one caller in at a time, don't they? It should list callers. So I'm kind of lost here for words at the moment. So if JP don't come, I guess we'll just have to reschedule him, and we'll just have to do the show today between you and I, Erlen.
Well, we'll make it work.
Have you got that information you were talking about the other day on which you'd read some of Ellen Brown's works?
I do, but before we do that,
Judy, you've got an incoming call.
Incoming. What's the latest, Byron? Well, let me just make a few comments here while we're waiting on Byron. The website that you can find all of this information is the North American Law Center, or you can just do an internet search on Balance of Power Act or Balance of Powers Act. And the website is NorthAmericanLawCenter.org. And I went on and I reviewed the website, and it's very
that's
interesting.
Fine. I apologize, and we'll call him back after the show is over. Okay, go ahead.
Byron, I was just giving a little background on this North American Law Center.
Mm-hmm.
And,
I know you were. I was listening.
Oh, okay, good. What's the latest?
Well, Keith called in again, and he can't get in on the number you got in on.
Really?
I don't understand that.
Yeah, that's weird. As far as, so I'm looking at the website, and I'm going through it, and I read the model legislation regarding, and I actually downloaded it regarding the Balance of Powers Act, and what it says, the title of it is An Act Prohibiting the Infringement of the Constitutionally Protected Rights of the constitutionally, rather, let me rephrase that because I had the wrong emphasis on the wrong syllable, an act prohibiting the infringement of the constitutionally protected rights of the state of, and put in your state, Minnesota or Tennessee, or its people via any federal act deemed by the state to be unconstitutional. And so I read through this act, and I like it, but here is really what helps people understand the act even more, in my opinion, Byron, and that goes back to state action. Let's see. There was a blurb in here. No, it's, let me find it. It was an article on, where is that? Let me find it. Is our Bill of Rights dead? So if you click on that link, it gives you the history of the Bill of Rights, because right now there is a movement going around in the country where they say that the supremacy clause of the Constitution means that any law that the federal government passes is constitutional, and it's supreme over state law and every other law. You've heard that, haven't you, Byron?
Oh, yeah, I've been told that.
You've heard that argument, and they totally eviscerate that argument.
I mean, the state legislature. Go ahead.
They totally eviscerate that argument in this article called Is the Bill of Rights Dead? And this is on the North American Law Center.org's website, and I read through that, and that to me is what gives the foundation for this Balance of Powers Act, because people are calling the balance of power, how can you do that? And you set up this mechanism within your state to nullify laws or to call these laws out as unconstitutional. How can you do that? And this gives the background behind it. And, what most people don't realize is that, you know, how constitutional provisions get tossed around, and sometimes they omit a word or two, and then they lose their meaning. And people go, you got to go back to the original words and read the darn things.
Well, yeah, and of course, what people don't realize is how big this thing really is, and how many people are really in on it, or maybe not in on it in the sense of really on the inside, but they have been taught to understand that the Constitution and the laws of the land are exactly what the judges say they are, basically the Supreme Court judges. And if they make a ruling, that's it. And that's law. That's solid. That's enforceable. And nobody can counteract that or check it or anything. And see, this is a lot of the problem and this all happened, of course, obviously when Roosevelt got to be president back in the 30s, and he clearly, if you studied it, took all the rights away and gave them back his license privileges. And after that, then, of course, you know, at that time, the Supreme Court was bucking him. So he said, well, if you don't like it, I'll just add more Supreme Court judges and put them on ones that will back me, and we'll just override you anyway. And they finally began to give in to him and say all the things that he was trying to do and doing that weren't constitutional. They started ruling that they were constitutional. And right there, see, the executive branch took over the judicial branch. And now they just work hand in glove because, you know, they clearly, with enough money, you can control most anything. And now Greg got in on that line. He just called in.
Okay. So let me just share this with you, Byron, because this is really, really important stuff. And so the question is our Bill of Rights dead? And according to an increasing number of so-called expert sources today, our Bill of Rights is dead because the people's silence on the matter is being interpreted as their consent. So once again, we have to rise up and make our feelings and opinions known.
And we've got to do it in a way that there's some enforcement behind it.
Absolutely. So in a recent state debate over states' rights in the Tennessee legislature, and I can't confirm this, but I suspect it has to do with this Balance of Powers Act that passed in Tennessee. At least it passed the legislature. I don't know if the governor signed it. Do you, Byron?
No, I'm not sure. I read it, and I thought he did, but I'm not positive about that.
So
because I thought they had actually passed it. Because as I understand it, this bill has been passed in a state or two.
Because we'll have to.
Just a second. Hold on a minute. Greg, are you there?
Okay.
Greg, are you there? We have a caller on the line. Yes. Greg, are you there?
Yes.
You can hear me?
I can barely hear him. I hear him, but barely.
Yes, I'm here.
Can you hear me, Greg? Greg?
Yes.
What? You got a radio or something going on in the background? We can't hardly hear you.
I think he needs to hang up and call in again because I'm hearing myself talk in the background on a delayed basis.
Have you got this on the someplace else, Greg?
Have you got this on someplace else, Greg?
Did you hear yourself, Byron?
Yeah,
there?
I'm listening to it on the internet.
You need to turn it
down,
off.
So we're hearing ourselves in the background.
On a delayed basis.
We're hearing ourselves in the background.
So we'll let him do that, and I'll keep commenting here on Tennessee. So here's a recent debate in Tennessee, and I suspect it was about this law. Byron and Senator Brian Kelsey made an astonishing claim that the 10th Amendment doesn't mean what it says, that states are subservient to the federal government under the Supremacy Clause, which trumps the Bill of Rights, even when the federal government is overtly acting beyond its constitutional authority and in direct violation of the Bill of Rights. And if you want to watch this video clip, I haven't, but it's on the NorthAmericanLawCenter.org's website. So
yeah, I didn't watch it because I was waiting to have JB, and we're going to reschedule it. And I'll just apologize. I never dreamed we'd have some, and I can't understand why this other caller got in and JP couldn't.
Yeah, that is strange.
I just don't understand that at all.
So according to
Greg must have hung up.
Yeah,
okay.
I don't know.
Greg must have hung up. I didn't want him to hang up. I just wanted him to turn off his computer so that we didn't hear the computer in the background.
Right.
But that's okay. Go ahead.
Hopefully he'll call back in. So, lo and behold, this Senator Brian Kelsey also happens to be an attorney. I know that's shocking to many out there in radio land. According to attorney Brian Kelsey, the Federal Supremacy Clause prohibits the states and the people from enforcing the Bill of Rights, even when it is clear that the federal government is acting in a despotic and tyrannical fashion in direct violation of the People's Bill of Rights. Now, this is a chilling statement, especially coming from a Tennessee Republican senator who holds a law degree and license to practice.
Well,
Mr. Kelsey is stating that the Bill of Rights is unenforceable due to the Federal Supremacy Clause, therefore legally dead, null and void. Where did Mr. Kelsey get such a treasonous, false notion?
Well, where is this Supremacy Clause found? Do you have the actual part in the Constitution? Go ahead.
I'm going to read it to you in just a moment. I'll continue. So the answer appears to be law school, as Mr. Kelsey is by no means alone in his views. American law schools stopped teaching constitutional law and started teaching only the procedure for creating law by setting precedents in the mid-1940s. Which is shortly after and during Roosevelt's tenure, as you mentioned previously, Byron. However, the Constitution grants the judicial branch no lawmaking authority whatsoever. Today's lawyers have a totally perverted understanding of the Constitution as a result. In a recent letter from Michigan State Speaker of the House, Jace Bolger, dated February 22, 2013, in which he relies upon the quote-unquote expert advice of his legislative attorney Doug Maines, Bolger makes the same treasonous false claims. Tennessee Attorney General Robert Cooper, Democrat son of Democrat U.S. Representative Jim Cooper, also goes to great lengths in his brief to assert the same false claims, establishing in his expert opinion as Attorney General for the state of Tennessee that the Bill of Rights is dead. Similar statements have been made by a Texas Attorney General Greg Abbott and numerous other federal and state officials. So this is a real problem. But when state legislators attempted to protect states and individual rights with the introduction of a Constitutional Balance of Powers Act drafted entirely upon the U.S. Constitution and Bill of Rights, left-wing groups like Democratic Underground and Daily Kos came out in force to attack those legislators. They just couldn't grasp any state attempting to uphold the Constitution and Bill of Rights by rejecting the unconstitutional acts of a runaway federal government. So now we have left-wing propaganda machines and state Republican legislators appeared to be on the same side, opposing states and individual rights and supporting unbridled federal supremacy. Even a number of left-wing Democratic law professors are publicly attacking the crazy notion that the Bill of Rights still exists in force and effect. So now I'm going to answer your question, Byron. So our silence is our consent. The leftist argument, I don't know, is it really a leftist argument?
Well, I don't think it is.
An authoritarian argument that the current Bill of Rights is no longer exists today is based entirely upon two totally perverted interpretations of constitutional law. It is not an accidental misinterpretation either. It is with specific purpose. The first perversion of constitutional law is in the misinterpretation of the Federal Supremacy Clause, which we were talking about. And we're finally getting to it after a little important background. The second is in the belief that the U.S. Supreme Court has the constitutional authority to grant itself the unbridled power as an unelected oligarchy, as the court attempted to do in Marbury versus Madison. Now, that's going way back in time. But what does the Federal Supremacy Clause actually say? Quote, Article 6, Section 2, Clause 2, quote, this Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. So that's what it actually says. But what does it mean? Well, number one, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Number two, U.S. laws made in pursuance thereof also enjoy federal supremacy. Number three, so long as those laws are made under the authority of the U.S. Number four, all judges are obligated to view laws on the above basis. And number five, anything in the Constitution or state laws notwithstanding. So the key phrase is this Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof. Okay, and that's the key phrase. Now, the other thing is the founders capitalized the word pursuance. Why did they capitalize that word? What does it mean, shall be made in pursuance thereof? Well, the founders often capitalized a word to emphasize its importance, as in the case here. So the bottom line is, if the law is not made in pursuance of the Constitution, then it's null and void on its face. And that's the bottom line, and that's where people are misconstruing. Just because Congress makes a law doesn't mean that it's in pursuance of and under the authority of, and they have the authority to make that law, Byron. Does that make sense?
Well, of course it does, but they can make any law they want, but then it's got to be challenged. But see, the problem is that they've also got control of the Supreme Court, and the courts are all now basically sprung up from liberal lawyers, and just because you're Republican doesn't mean that you're not liberal as heck. And
right.
So now the only place you can go is you go into court and challenge the constitutionality, and we saw that clearly in the Obamacare, that the judges actually had to change the law in order to make it constitutional, because it wasn't constitutional in several phases, but they said, well, if you call it a tax, then they would have the power to tax, so therefore it would be constitutional. But yet, all through the whole pushing of the Obamacare bill, it was declared not to be a tax. It wouldn't be a tax on anybody. So see, now they push the bill as one thing, but to make it constitutional, let's say it says something else. And this is the problem we have, but because we don't understand how big a hold that the monetary system, the bankers, through being able to create all the money as interest-bearing debts, have been able to claim and get a hold of all these legislators, or most of them. You'll find a few that they don't, and normally they get, they really get tore apart by the media. And a year or two ago, I was in a break room. I was reading the newspaper, and it talked about how many millions of dollars that the Chicago Tribune owed to the bankers. Well, when you owe that much money, it's clear you don't run the paper anymore. Your creditor runs the papers. Your banker runs the paper, because if you don't do what he likes, he pulls the funding. And the minute he pulls the funding, when you have that much debt, you're put out of business, because he can call that debt in anytime he wants to and take anything away from you. And see, this is another thing that the people don't realize. This all comes from the power to create money for your own personal profit.
Yes.
And that's the problem we have, that nobody wants to address that problem. We see it a lot, even in really, people who are trying to promote liberty or say they are, they still don't want to address the real root of the problem. The problem stems from the power that people are able to accumulate because they have the power over to control all the money, and they only let it out to people through interest-bearing loans, which then puts them in debt to the bankers, which then says, if you don't do what I say, I can call your note anytime I want to and put you out of business. Now behave yourself or else.
Yeah, and we all know how powerful money is, because we're all scrambling and chasing it, and we're all on the hamster wheel about every day of our lives.
In fact, that's cute, because I asked a guy at work the other day, just out of the clear blue sky. There was a commercial on the radio, on the radio there, early in the work, and it was talking about, they was really advertising to sell something. So I walked over and asked this guy just a second. I said, well, let me ask you a question. Does money chase goods, or does goods chase money? And he thought a little bit, and he said, well, it's clearly that money chases the goods. And yet all these economists and people who talk about this...
opposite, Byron.
No, pardon me. Goods chase the money.
Yes.
That's what I meant to say. The goods chase the money. And it's the proof of it is all the advertising you do, and you hear about, and the people do, to sell their products, to get the product out and get the money in. But you never hear any ads about, I've got lots of money, would you please come in and tell me and show me what you want to get rid of, I'll be glad to buy it. You never see these kind of ads.
Isn't that
so
the truth?
It's clear that the goods are always out there chasing the money, and as salesmen, Greg, if you're there, I think you're online now. You can talk to me if you want.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, and we can hear you good now, and we don't have that background noise either.
Speak up a little bit, though.
Okay.
And as salesmen, you guys know that you've got to go out and get people to buy things because you want their money, and you're just trying to push whatever goods you're selling, no matter where you're selling them, to try to get that money. Otherwise, you can't exist. And it shows you that how clearly all the economists are in on this too, because they all get educated from the same schools the lawyers got educated from.
Right.
And once you get in there, and all these, it's no accident that all these professors are liberals, if not communist, because they're all taught, and then they teach these same things that you was talking about. That the Constitution has basically been changed, and because of one clause in it someplace, it validates all the other clauses that came in, or that people wouldn't even, the Anti-Federalists wouldn't even adopted the Constitution in the first place if they hadn't got the Bill of Rights in. So how can then the clause that was in there, how can it, devoid the what was put in later so that people would vote the Constitution in? I mean, it's clearly a conspiracy, and it's clearly it's a big one where the people, and controlled by the banking, obviously, because who else has all the money to loan everybody all the money and has money, power to call these loans in and take their property away or take their job away or whatever. And I've heard about they pay people for chairs and in colleges. Well, that takes a lot of money too to fund all that stuff. Another interesting thing I've learned, I've called down to the University of Minnesota several times trying to talk to economists about money and stuff, and they always tell me that, well, don't call us, call the Federal Reserve, because every economist in the University of Minnesota works in one way or another for the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis.
Amazing.
So these are the problems we face, and the problem we really don't get to is the fact that nobody really wants to address the truth of that, where the power really comes from, and who are the drivers of the force behind it makes all these things go the way they are. And of course, if you research it, I was reading some stuff the other day where Madison and Hamilton lived both in New York, so they was close friends and worked together, and they was the ones that was pushing the Constitution the hardest in the Federalist Papers. Well, then nobody ever hears much about the anti-Federalist Papers, the people who wrote articles and saying, well, we don't like this, and we want these Bill of Rights added at least, or we're not going to support the Constitution, and hardly anybody ever hears about that. And so even from the get-go, in Hamilton we know, you just got to read a little bit about his works, and I've read quite a little of it in a book I have called Financial History of the United States from 1780 to 1860, of how right away he was appointed Secretary of the Treasury, and the second thing he did was demand they put in a central bank. And he told all the legislators in that, that was working on that, he said, if you vote for this, they have all this money out there, the Continentals, and lots of money was created by the states and stuff to pay soldiers, and I was out there now trading around on about 10 cents on the dollar or less. He says, if you will pass this bill and give me the central bank, then we will be able to pay you interest and go on that money, and we will be able to pay that debt all off, dollar for dollar. And they just rushed out of that Congress and hired all kinds of people to run out and buy up all that money that was spent, moving around in circulation 10 cents on the dollar. So, and then once they got that bought, then they went back and passed a bill and started the central bank that started creating money as loans.
Well, I have a question for you, Byron. I thought
Sure.
that knowledge was power. Are you telling us that money is power?
Well, I think probably money puts out most of the knowledge that's out there, or the power of money.
I'm just kidding, because I think anybody that's lived that's above maybe 5 years old knows that if you got some money, you got some power to do some things.
And, it's obvious how they control, how money controls, and especially once everybody owes you. And there was a video that came into me this morning. I sent it to Greg. I didn't get it sent to you yet, Arlon, but because it was especially, it talked a lot about money, just numbers. And that's something Greg has pushed pretty hard here the last year or so. And it was amazing to me. I've never heard that in another video before. But again, they told the same old lies that, the bankers only lend the depositors money. And they can lend out, and it was really well done because it showed where you started with one bank and you deposit your money in there, and then they put $1 in the cash, $10 in the cash register, and then loaned the other one right out of the window, the other 9. And then it said how when that money was deposited in the bank, well, then they could do the same thing, and pretty quickly they had that expanded out to unbelievable size of how much money went in circulation just from loaning the 9%, the $90 out of your first 100 deposit, but they never explained where the first 100 come from. But they showed how it totally expansion of all debt. Then they showed
where does the first 100 come from?
Well, originally it had to come from either tobacco leaves or musket balls or gold or silver or
that were mined out of the ground and brought to the U.S.
But
Mint.
see, all those things were used for money and was actually declared legal tender in the colonies. I mean, that's clearly provable. And so that's where the first one had to come from, and then after that it all. But then they showed they had little stacks, and they showed how that stack went up as the money supply went up. But then they showed how much faster it went up when the interest was added. So the debt was always greater than the money supply, no matter how big the money supply got. And then they showed how that money was destroyed, and as the loan was paid back, they had a little bomb in the bottom of them things, and every time they'd do that, they'd blow up the money supply, and they'd blow up the debt, and the pile would get a little smaller and smaller until finally there was no money left, and there was still a big pile of debt.
So it's really pretty good video.
Well, it was well done, except for the fact that they didn't have right, that the banks don't loan, they just create money every time they loan. They don't loan anybody's money. Oh, and they showed, well, the reason they can loan out $9 out of, or $90 out of every 100, they put $10 in the cash register, and they showed the cash register, and then they said, well, your checking account still shows $100 because they also put in an IOU for $90. And they said they put that 10 in there as a reserve just in case somebody might want their money. Well, we know from experience, and I was talking to a woman at work the other day, and she said her first paycheck every month has to go just to rent. So obviously if they deposit that, where she spent the whole thing, probably the next day to pay the rent, so how could they even give back any of the money? How could you have, if you spent all that paycheck, then that whole deposit would be gone, so how could they loan that to anybody? And how could they have that, even a $10 reserve for that, when it took the whole paycheck just to pay the rent?
Well, talking about the reserve is a real misnomer because they're actually confusing numbers, which represent money, with paper that is printed that is only 10% of the money stock around anyway.
Yeah, right? None of that. 2/3 of all that printed money is overseas anyway.
So they're confusing that because money is just numbers. And so I can either give you numbers as a check or I can give you numbers in Federal Reserve notes, but they're confusing the reserve requirement with the actual paper Federal Reserve note.
Well, in reality, there is no reserve retirement. Did you want to say something, Greg?
I just wanted to get back to what Arlon was talking about initially about the people's consent, allowing a lot of this stuff to happen. And my question is, or my thought is, how do we change that? What has to happen for people to become concerned enough that they don't want to be complacent and they want to get something done when we have to struggle with the lack of education in our educational system, with the lack of education of the immigration, the people that are coming into the country, they're not being taught anything. So what has to happen for, the people and, the right people, because there's some on the other side that understand what's going on, but they all benefit from it and they don't want to change it. But, how do we get concern amongst the people?
Well, I think partly by doing what we're doing. We write articles and put them on the internet. I think this show will go a long ways to help that, because I'm quite sure there are other people who are interested, and if not hear this show one way or the other. I know I've sold some books lately that probably had to come from this show, and because they're just ordering Tales from the Treasury, which is what we talk a lot about, is where we got a lot of the information out. And we both, Greg and I both have written letters to the Treasury, and they say the same thing, that the banks create all the money as interest-bearing loans, and they do it by just simply adding numbers to the checking account. So it's not like it's anything hidden. It's just a matter that...
Well, let me weigh in. Are you done, Byron?
Yeah, go ahead, because what paused me, I just saw another caller come in.
Oh, okay.
And so why don't I go ahead? You speak, and I'll open him up so that he can
okay.
Talk to if he wants to.
So, Greg, you're asking the $1 million question. How can we get people interested in changing what we see as wrong, and people that are not really doing anything don't either realize, understand, or they're ignorant that things are going wrong? And to give you a couple of examples, what happens is when you go into the judicial system, some people get sucked in, and nobody has any idea how corrupt and how outrageous and egregious the behavior is on the part of lawyers, judges, and members of the judicial system that work for the government, and they get paid. That's their job, and their job turns into harassing and terrorizing people. And until you have some firsthand experience with that, and or a friend does, you don't realize, and you don't And so one of the efforts we're doing in this whole judicial reform is to help people understand this is terrible. There's a lot of bad things going on, but it can also translate into, look, one of the reasons these bad things are going on is because of the money system, and that's the root of the problem, and the judicial tyranny is a symptom. And so that's one way that we can try and get more attention, Greg, because you're asking the $1 million question. How do we do that? How can we get people involved? How can we educate? And I certainly don't have all the answers, but I think that one of the things we need to do is start exercising our First Amendment rights more, and by that I mean petitioning for the redress of grievances. And by petitioning, it means writing letters, it means picketing, it means walking around and challenging tyranny and challenging authority with signs and handouts and all that type of thing, because the reform movement is very dispersed, and conservatives and right-wing type people are very dispersed and not really want to go out and challenge authority like some of the left-wing and poorer people are. And somehow we have to get the attention of everybody and unite. So those are my comments on it, Greg, but it's a tough question.
Well, of course, part of that problem is, too, that we're constantly being told that we'll get in trouble, we'll go to jail, or possibly get shot or whatever if we do those things. And that's upmost in people's mind. If I had a dollar for every time I've been told I'd get shot for doing some of the things that I'm doing, I'd have more money to do a lot of this with. And just a second, I don't know who this is. We've got another caller at 341-3431 to 651. If you're there, you're alive. If you'd like to make a comment, we're open to hear it.
Hey, Byron and Arlen and Greg, this is John here in Minnesota. We've met before, Byron, over at your house, John Miser. So,
oh, yes, yes.
Yeah, so I just I wanted to get a theme of what you guys were talking about, but I can definitely also attest. I don't know where to go, but I can attest to the judicial corruption, that you guys are speaking about, and having personally just experienced it here in the First Judicial District with Judge Carolyn H. Lennon, a judge who decided to fail that she didn't even need to take her oath of office to get qualified. And
yet the law clearly says she must, doesn't it?
Yeah, it clearly says, and the legislature has also clearly provided that if she fails to do it, that the office is vacated. It's like a self-executing statute that says if you don't do this, then you vacate the office, and the only way the office can be reoccupied is to either be through appointment or through, an election, and she vacated the office for 3 years. And that was just kind of like snuck in and, retook the oath and is sitting there as an imposter in the office. And I'm suffering, like you just mentioned. She's thrown me in jail. They're threatening to throw me in jail again. They're threatening to trump up garbage kind of charges. So I think to, Greg's point earlier and to what you guys are trying to do is like, what can we do to fight back on this? A new thing that I've just started doing, and I thought I would just share this with you guys. You can ask some questions, but I've just started here in this last 2 weeks. They have bonds, and they have bonds in the way of insurance policies through the city, county, or state. Minnesota, it's the risk management division that insures the judges. Through your county prosecutors or cops, it's the Minnesota City's Trust Insurance Group or the county's Trust Group. And what I've begun to do is I've requested a copy of those policies, the liability part. And in that liability part, the city, the county, or the state buys insurance coverage for willful malfeasance, violation of secured rights by these people. They buy insurance protection. So what my idea is, go ahead.
It's very obvious, and they know that they're going to do it and are doing it. Otherwise, why would they need insurance for it?
Yeah.
And they have to know that they're doing it. Go ahead.
Yeah, so what I'm doing right now is I am like writing in, putting a complaint in or a notice of damages to the city, county, or state, notifying that I'm being damaged by the individual. Now, what's interesting is what I'm hoping for is some leverage here is that the covered entity, the city, the state, or the county, has a contract with the insurance provider. And the insurance provider requires specific duties of the insured person to perform if they've been noticed and if they want to continue getting coverage. It's very strong language, and my hope is that they have to notice them that they have a potential claim coming. And when they have a potential claim coming, they could decide to say, well, now that we notice that there's a claim, and let's say this judge is errant, Carolyn Lennon, Dave Knutson, there's a bunch of them out there. But if they're errant, we can say, great, as we examine this complaint, we're no longer going to provide coverage for this particular entity. It's your responsibility now, state. So if you want to keep them on the bench, great. That's your risk, no longer ours. I mean, they've got that kind of a rider in the policy to say we can pluck them off once we've been notified. So I'm just mentioning that because this might be a way that we could start creating some action.
Well, I think that you have to. That's what I used to do. I don't do so much of that anymore. I tried all that kind of stuff, and the more we do it, the more we understand how to do it, and the more of us to do it, the more effective we will be. And I think we need to do those kind of things too. I mean, and we need to band together, and we're doing more of that, all the time, and people are starting to come forward and get to know each other, and each one has got to do what he thinks he has. Of course, you have to fight your own battles when you're in them. But anybody that can, that has some experience, and like you and Erlon together, and other people that we've had two people on this program when we first started that had been royally screwed, and that one woman with that the judges sent an order out of nowhere. I mean, there wasn't any jurisdiction, there wasn't any. She'd never been in any action, nothing. I mean, he had no authority whatsoever to ever ran into it. It took her, just kicked her out of the house, which I would have never went. I'd have said, no, you got to throw me me out and charge me, then at least I'll get a trial on the criminal charges instead of just throw it out and left out and then nobody pays any attention to it. And it takes a lot of guts to do some of these things. You know, most people are just scared to death being in jail.
Yeah, it's a big
but yet
fear
sometimes
factor.
we have to do that in order to get the knowledge, in order to, you know, to bring it to light. Because if they may even take that away from us. They're trying to, but normally if you get charged, you you also have a right to trial and speedy trial. So that at least can bring it forward that, you know, to where people have to address it. Where this woman, you know, she's tried everything, just going to talking to legislators and other people, and, you know, they get the same old stone every time. And that's when I found I was doing this years ago. I mean, for a long time, you know, really a lot. And no matter where I went, I always ended up sitting there was in front of a lawyer sitting behind a desk on his big fat ass, and that's where it all stopped. Because
let me jump in for a minute.
That's the power they got through the judicial system that they've taken over too, and we all have to recognize that. But that don't mean we don't have to keep pushing this. And I think what started this whole conversation in this program today was this Balance of Powers Act. I think we need to get together and push something like that in the legislature too, and go to our own particular legislators and talk to them about it if they'll give us a hearing. And I used to get them pretty good. Now I don't so much, but some of them guys have not been reelected. So, and I think we have to stop reelecting all these guys that we went to. And if they're not willing at all to address these issues, then we need to get as many people possible to not reelect them. And you can't ever change anything if you keep electing the same old people back year after year after year after year.
Right.
I worked in the legislature on a bill for 17 years. It'll be 19 years now. And a lot of the legislators that was in there when I started are still in the legislature in Minnesota.
Yeah, you can't change if something's got to change. But, Greg, getting back to your question, what can we do? I think John Miser, and thanks for calling in, John, is Exhibit A on what we need to do, and these are actions and activists. If you see something going wrong or somebody doing wrong, somebody not following the law in government, you challenge them. And this is what we can do to try and change things. We challenge them constantly. And other people will join in on the challenge because it's going to help them, and that's what we have to do, because other people are going to experience the same thing, and we all need to kind of work together. And once there's a template on challenging them, it makes it a lot easier. The first guy doing it's got to do the work, but from then on it gets a lot easier. Would you agree with that, John?
Yeah, I would think so, because it's kind of hard, because I've written a number of complaints to the Judicial Standards Board, and they've been denied, but it's like, okay, well, that didn't work. How do I reconfigure it to get it to work and stick this time? Because they're just designed not to try and hold each other accountable. I mean,
that's
it's really
what the whole
sham.
thing is. I mean, they protect themselves. You know, each other protects the other guy, and that's where it all comes from. That's why you get it this way. But of course, one thing happened, and I see it, and I really saw it in that video I was talking about, because some of the exact words that I had written in my last book, they used word for word. I mean, it was just not one word or two. It was a complete sentence, exactly right out of my book. And then, again, I have never seen another video or anything on money where they talked about it was just numbers, like they did on this last video. So there's no question we're having an impact. And we also have to understand that, you know, back when they had the Revolutionary War, it took about 25 years from when the first guy started raising thunder where they actually had nerve enough to say, we're not going to put up with it anymore. And you come to take our guns to the church, we're going to stand there and fight back. And you know, so although I've been at it 30 years, I still believe that we are slowly making progress, because you didn't hear anybody else talking about how the money system worked or how corrupt the court system was, or any of those things when I first started. When I had my first trial in McIntyre, South Dakota, it had been 26 years or something like that since it had a trial period in that county. And after that,
Wow.
they had quite a few more of them. Because everybody, most people, most of the thing they have is just a speeding ticket or something, or drunk driving, and they just, well, I'm guilty, and that's it. There's no such thing as saying, well, let's have a trial and let's have the community come in and make a decision on this. This is kind of like that sheriff they just talked about in Florida, where he had one of his deputies arrest a guy going home, and he had a gun that wasn't registered, and so he charged him, and this particular sheriff is really pretty strong on the Second Amendment. He said, I just don't think that's right. I'm not going to press charge against him. And he just turned him loose. Well, the governor got after him, and then they charged him for criminally. And a bunch of made up charges just like you was talking about, and John. And but he demanded a jury trial, and the jury just laughed and found him not guilty.
Oh, they did?
Yeah, there's an awakening out there, and he's in a small community. He was well-liked, and it's not a really big community in Florida. It wasn't a big population, but therefore a lot of the people who voted for him and liked him and knew what he stood for, they was on the jury too, and they said, not on your life is he guilty. So now he's got to be reinstated as sheriff and everything. But I don't understand how, and I don't know, some states anymore don't have elected sheriffs, but I don't see how an elected sheriff can be put out of office anyway, unless, now in South Dakota the law was clear that the county coroner could bring a charge against the sheriff, but of course they wouldn't back in those days. But, I don't know the procedure in Florida. But see, even then they couldn't just kick him out of office and make him not sheriff, because he's elected. He has to have a recall election or have some, come wait till the next election and then not re-elect him in. So there's so many things they've done to us, and it's all this, just like Erlen was saying earlier about these law schools. They teach them absolute lies. I remember a long time ago, my oldest son, he had a friend that came to one of his football games, and he was just starting his first year at law school. And he introduced us, and when Brad went off to play ball, we talked, and so I asked him about some of the things he was taught, and I brought up the money, and he said, well, yeah, they say it isn't right the way it ought to be, but it's just the way it is, and that's the way it is, and you got to uphold it. So, see, again, it was clearly being taught. Also, he said it was just too difficult to understand. So I said, well, it's not difficult at all, and laid it out. And he didn't know where to go. And, of course, I never seen him again and know what happened. But, these are the things when you get control of the education system, and that's something they've worked really hard to do, then they don't have to reach all the people, because they got all the people going to colleges being taught not the truth, but a lie, basically, something that's not true, not correct every day in their classes.
Well, Byron, you talk about banding together, and you sent me this video. I haven't watched it yet, but you said it's about half right, and a lot of it's copied from your material or probably from the WealthMoney.org website. And I would sure wish, if some of these people have the wherewithal to do these great videos, instead of getting it half right, would connect with us and work with us to put the material out there in a better form, but also in a correct form. I mean, there's a lot of people.
This was an excellent forum. I mean, it couldn't have been done any better. I mean, it was clearly really, really professionally done. And, I mean, somebody got paid big bucks to put that baby together. I mean, it was one of the best I've ever seen so far. But then again, it told things that just simply was not true. And, of course, it was put out and paid for by a gold dealer, because it clearly says, the federal Constitution says that you have to use gold for money. And, of course, that's not true. There's a thing in the Constitution that says no state shall make anything but gold over legal tender, but there's nothing like that about the federal government. It just simply says they have the power to coin money. It doesn't say what they would coin or how they would do it or anything about it. So, see, again, they made a false statement to push their gold, which they're all making money on. They're buying gold cheap one place and selling it at a bigger price, and just a good business and lots of profit in the business.
And right there, when you talk about what the Constitution says, clearly many of the founders had good intentions, but you also know at the same time that they probably didn't know what they have. Article 1, Section 8, the first power gives Congress the authority to borrow money on the credit of the United States, and then it gives them later the authority to create money. Now, why would you need both? If you could create money, why would you need to borrow money? And
well, because I honestly think most of them didn't have a clue. And I think there was a few. I read a few articles about, from them, and one I've reread since in the last 6 months, and it was clearly not even correctly setting forth what the guy was actually arguing about. It twisted it from the way I first heard it the first time. It had been twisted from what the original writing was. I saw later, to push their concept of gold. But
right.
Again,
what I'm trying to get to is, regardless of what the Constitution said or was intended, the fact of the matter is, the reality is, now we use numbers for money, and they clearly work to a good extent. But the thing that needs to be changed about it, we could continue to use numbers. Everybody wants to use numbers. That's what we're using, and those numbers simply have to be created and spent into circulation in lieu of taxation or bonding as an earned payment, an earned debt-free payment that represents our production, some form of production that we all can use and benefit from free of charge. And I don't care if it talks about states cannot emit bills of credit nor coin money, or that it's supposed to be gold or silver, whatever. The difference is it's a difference between wealth versus debt. And if we're using numbers, and we are, that's all we use. You can't get Federal Reserve notes into circulation without writing a check for cash against the bookkeeping entries in your checking account. And the checking account numbers don't get in there. The only way they get in there is through the lending process. So, that's the fact. We use numbers, and all we have to do is change the way we put them into circulation.
Yeah, it's easy to do, and of course the hard part is getting the people to address that fact, and not just say. And of course this basically video. I didn't watch the whole thing, but it was done by a gold dealer to promote gold, so he could sell more gold. And and this is the problem. That's what one of the big bankers said a long time ago. Those who understand it will move aside to get the benefits, and the rest of the people plod on, never knowing what happened.
Yeah, and then what are the people going to buy all that gold and silver with? That rotten, no good, worthless money that they're all trying to get rid of?
Yeah, and that's it.
What is the gold dealer want? Yeah, what does the gold dealer want?
That's another thing. If they're so sold on gold, why are they trying to sell it? So why are they starting advertising so much and doing everything to sell it for the other money when they say the other money is no good and the gold is the only good money? Yeah. I mean, it's obviously, you clearly can see from that it's just done from a different avenue to get profit. And of course that's a problem too, because once they control all the money, then it's easy to control the schools, it's easy to control the education the lawyers get and the bankers get and the economists get, which means the education the rest of the people get. And long time ago I had a guy was at a meeting and we was talking about this and explaining it to people, and the guy, a friend of mine, came up and he said, well, Byron, you did a good job. You explained it really well to about 10, 12 people today, but the colleges just told it different to about 100 or maybe 1 million students today. And that's another thing we fight. But again, if we keep going and we keep putting this information out and keep talking about it, then we will slowly bring up the level of understanding, because as more people get hurt by this, and you're seeing it all the time, they're always getting arrested for nothing. Like the other day, they shot a 13-year-old kid just because he had a toy gun. Someday the people are going to get tired of that, and I think you're seeing more and more of that all the time, slowly rising to the top.
Byron, let me just make a comment, and this is for your concern, Greg and John, if you're still with us. The paradox in this whole thing is the worse the judicial corruption gets, the more progress we're making. And that doesn't make any sense, but that's the truth of what's going to happen. Things got to get a lot worse, more people will wake up, and that's the paradox. So the fact that things are getting worse means we are making progress.
Well, and of course, it's just like anything else. They keep the more power they get, the more power they want, and the more they can just ram over people. And it was really educational to me several years ago, when they started them traffic ticket cameras downtown Minneapolis where they could charge you with, just off the film. And that finally got challenged, and they threw it out. But the interesting thing was then they had to give back all that money. And they then, in the paper, it listed a long list of where all the different people who got money from the traffic tickets. And it was the library and just other on and on and on. It was just unbelievable. I don't remember them all, how many people actually got a cut out of the traffic ticket. And all those people wanted to keep going because they want the money. They need the money to operate, or think they do.
Yeah, so that's not a problem with having too much money there.
It's never a problem to having too much money, except in Ron Paul's mind, where that's the problem. And that was another thing that this video that I was talking about earlier that clearly said that's the cause of inflation, is just they keep create more and more money all the time. And he clearly indicated it was a debt, but when he got to that part, he never said anything. Just the increase in the money supply caused inflation, not because of the interest on it and raising the cost of business because of the interest. They never addressed that part. And but the rest of it was pretty good, and it should wake up a few more people and make a few more people interested and believe in what we've been saying for years, that we have documentation. I mean, everything that we say, how the money system works, come right out of the Federal Reserve's booklets or the Treasury's letters to Greg and I personally, or the Library of Congress or whatever, that we've got, trying to understand this and trying to push it so people would see whether it really was happening. And of course, you're seeing it now. I have a young friend that has some farmers, and he told me the other day now it costs $800 just to put in an acre of corn. And now they've dropped the corn prices in half, and he's going to suffer a terrible loss because his crop isn't so good this year because it rained so late. And there's more people going to get hurt, and all this process, it all works for the benefit of the bankers, because they just simply slowly take all the ownership of everything and put it in fewer hands that's related to them. And that brings me up a point. I was contacted from a guy had connections to Cambodia about how they could create money. Well, then they sent me some videos, and I think Greg looked at some of them, about the total corruption there, about how one family run it all, and every person that had little power was one of their relatives, and it listed them and showed them all how they was linked together and stuff like that. And that's basically what's happened in this country, only they're all how they're related to the banking system. And years ago, I found a pamphlet that put out by Mobil Oil Company that said, "Leave the Fed alone." That's what the whole flyer said. They're doing a good job, and leave them alone. So, but there's slowly more people waking up. It just don't seem like they can get it quite all together right. They don't want to do the real research to, when they put their stuff out. And maybe it's on purpose. They don't want to get it completely right. I don't know. I mean, not knowing any of them, and I've never had any luck in contacting any of them to get me that they would contact me back, where you could actually work with them. And I think this show, if we grow it, and we've had a little problems, and partly my fault, and that I didn't understand that I had to do something every week that I thought I had done, because we had it going. So we lost a good guy, but today they've been on there to explain the Balance of Powers Act, and also we'd have been able to talk to him a little about the money, and we'll get this. I'm sure we'll be able to get him to schedule later, and as it takes me time to work all the bugs out of doing this, I think that we'll get better and better at it. And I think that having you guys come in, I really like it when you guys call in and we all talk together, because this helps to enlarge the conversation and helps, some more people see that there's more people interested in it. And then even like John, we need your input, because you've had a lot of experiences. There's no reason that you shouldn't be telling people about this over this radio show, so this goes out and more people understand the total corruption we have in the system, not just in the money system, which it stems from, but in the other places that through the money power they have gained total control of the judicial system and probably the legislative whole concept too.
Right. One part, I'm really grateful for this, for your taking the time and doing this, Byron. A good case in point, I was watching KSTP News this week, and they had that program on sovereign citizens that they were going to do. Well, prior to that program coming on, I was watching, I don't watch TV anymore. Basically, I've just turned it off. Because it's just a propaganda programming device. But it was interesting to watch with a critical eye 2 nights ago because they were talking about the gas tax. And the talking heads there basically said, the gas tax is exhausted. It's no longer going to work. It's going to change in the next 5-10 years, and it doesn't serve its purpose anymore. So we have to find a new way to tax. And, we're going to have to put a black box in your car that measures miles. Well, I was pausing it every moment, and I was turning to the people who were sitting with me watching it because they don't know, right? They don't know. They're just sitting there, and I said, do you notice how they're programming you? They're showing that you have no option, and they're showing you that you have it here. I said, that's not news. This is like Soviet-style propaganda. And if people can start to see and critically watch a program and just see that, this message that they said here on KSTP when he said, you have no option, it's going to happen. It's a foregone conclusion. They're trying to condition you to what's going to happen so they take the will of the fight out or that you have nothing to do. And you'll hear this same message on the other stations, on WCCL, when they talk about the gas tax and its run its useful life. I said, you've got to look at this, that the money people, as you're pointing out, are buying the ability to create propaganda, to just disenfranchise the people, to neuter their will to do anything different. And so it's a program like this where people can kind of go like, okay, wow, this is a different message. I'm hearing something different. And it's like, don't believe it. Go check it out. Go check it out. Well, go check it out for yourself and just start to see what's going on because, we're just saying some things too. But, like we're trying to give you like facts and evidence and then go check it out for yourself and see if it resonates. And it as I say that, it's a thing that I've said, if you're not mad, you're not paying attention or you're not aware. And it's like that network movie from 1976 when he said, mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. Well, this show is going to hopefully wake up people where they go to the window and say, I'm not going to take it anymore, Federal Reserve. I'm not going to take it, bankers. I'm not going to take it, judicial system. Because until you start getting injured, until your cow starts getting gored, you're kind of going like with iPods in your ears, watching Dancing with the Stars and wondering, the Vikings ever going to win a football game. Let me drink another Miller beer.
There you go.
People they're anesthetized.
Well, that's the reason I do watch the news once in a while. It's only to see what they're trying to do to us. Because stop and think about that and just logic. Now, having a bug in your car telling you exactly how many miles you drive and where is not going to produce any more revenue than just paying the gas tax at the pump.
Right.
I mean, come on, let's think about it. You're still going to have to pay on how many miles you drive, right? Now, they may raise it more, just like they could raise the gas tax. But what you just said clearly proves that they're trying to get you to accept that they have a right to know every move you make and every place you drive.
Right. John, I found your take on that. I watched the same thing before the sovereign citizens deal, and I think your take on it is very, very astute. But my take was different, and because I've been involved in trying to get, funding for transportation in Minnesota, debt-free, I had a different take on it. I'm thinking, what are you, an idiot, Jay Coles? You didn't know about us? We need to send you some information, don't we? And the new Commissioner of Transportation in Minnesota, Zelli, Byron, you and I met him at that Transportation Finance Committee, and he may still be, I don't know, the president of Jefferson Lines. We need to go set up a meeting with that guy because now there's a new face in there, and obviously we didn't make any progress with the guy that was there. Now there's a new guy. And so my take on it was a little different But I appreciate your take, John. That's very astute.
Well, I think your take was correct, John, because it's clear. I mean, let's think about it really logically. If they put a bug in your car and they know exactly how many miles you drive, well, you couldn't drive those miles without having to buy the gas in the first place, could you?
That's right.
So then where in the world would they get any more different source of revenue than what they got already? They got it from how many miles you drove, and that's what you do. That's what happens. But the difference is when you pay the tax at the gas pump, nobody knows where you were going to drive or what you're going to drive or anything about that, and nobody cares. But if they put it in the car, then they're going to know exactly where you went and everything you did.
Right.
I mean, that's the purpose for it, is obviously, and I remember a long time ago in South Dakota when all of a sudden they said we have in this state we have a limit that interest rate can be charged, but we've got to change that because if we don't, the state will dry up for money. And of course, at the time, I said, "Man, how can that be? That don't make sense. I mean, what's the rate of interest got to do? How much money comes into the state?" Because I thought most of the money come in when you sold your cattle, and they finally go to someplace out of state, and the money comes in. Well, that doesn't have anything to do with the rate of interest that we're paying. But of course, as soon as they got the people convinced they had to do that, well, then within a year and a half, the interest went to 18 to 22%. So, see, they had another agenda in mind when they started pushing that over the radio, just to get people to accept the passage of the bill that would take off the ceiling on interest.
Yeah. About 15 years ago, Byron, I went to Singapore on a business trip. And while I was there, I was stunned because I saw all these cameras all over the road recording people's movement. Mm-hmm. And they said, "Oh, this helps slow traffic." And it was there, and you could just feel the state watching the people. Well, I drive around now here in the Twin Cities, and there are so many cameras that watch us on everything here. And I don't think people even know that. And it just seems that they've really, really kind of exploded in the last 5 years, where they've really come up. And because people are noticing on all of our major freeways, they're putting on, the barriers so that you can't cross. So then they can start to control the traffic in a way once, if civil unrest occurs. But they've got all these eyes. And I just go like, I haven't seen one letter to the editor. I haven't seen anything where anyone is complaining about Big Brother watching. And now they're going to talk about putting a device in the car. And they're already kind of doing it with their smartphones over here to start to track people. They just go through it, and it's like, I just, again, if you're not upset, you're not paying attention. You just don't know what's going on.
And then, it was so obvious when we talked to that woman the other day. I mean, she had really been royally worked over. But, it was clear she was also afraid to do anything. I mean, the very concept of her saying, "Well, I'm sorry, I don't know where this, this order to get out of the house came from, and I'm not going to do it. I don't care what the consequences are. You're going to have to throw me out, and you're going to have to charge me with something, and then I'll have a right to trial." But she was just scared to death to even think about such a thing. Oh, no. And even the other woman had her baby taken away. But she said, well, the officer who was serving it was just doing his job. And that's not true. Our officers of law are not just delivery men for the judges. They're supposed to be in a separate branch of government, and they're supposed to check, wait a minute, does this look like a lawful right order or not? I'm not going to go out and deliver all this stuff unless it is. But see, they forgot that. And years ago I had a sheriff tell me that, well, the state's attorney was his boss. And I said, well, wait a minute. You don't have a boss. You're elected by the people. You don't have a boss. And he, well, he's my legal advisor, and I got to do whatever he says. Well, see, it's again that education that you have to do what some lawyer says every time without question.
Right.
And all of us, so probably on this show, have experienced some of that is clearly total corrupt. Absolutely, they don't follow the laws. They don't do anything. They just do what they want to do when the notion strikes them.
Right.
And we've all experienced it. If you've done anything at all, you've experienced this. And even if you haven't done, sometimes just a little quirk goes wrong in the span of your lifetime, and all of a sudden you get faced with all this and how really corrupt they are and how little they pay attention to the laws and how many they really don't even know what the law is in lots of cases. But they don't have to, because I got kicked out of a federal attorney's office in Pierce, South Dakota one time because I went to him and I asked him what his job was, and he said it was to enforce the law. So I said, well, I have some laws I'd like to have you look at then, and I pulled them out, and it was laws about money, and all money had to be kept to a certain standard, and he said that isn't the law, and so he rolled across the room a little bit and grabbed his law off his shelf, and he read it, and that's exactly what it said, because I just copied it out the day before. And he said, well, that must have been updated. So he looked, and he couldn't find that either. Then he exploded and ordered us out and called in a marshal and had us taken out of that and taken down and put out on the street out of his office at the threat of being shot. I mean, he didn't pull out his gun, but he had a hold of it, and it was clear that he would use it if we didn't get going, like the state's attorney said. It wasn't the state's attorney; it was the federal prosecutor. So you see right then how deep this stuff goes. I mean, they've all been brainwashed out of the same schools to do the same thing without question.
Yeah.
And, that's the thing we've got to fight, and we somehow got to get these people woke up to the fact that they're being educated wrong in their colleges. I had a guy tell me, I went through all this money with 3 different guys I worked with, and they was all young execs there, and one of them said, yeah, you're right, but it's working for me, so I don't care. And the other guy says, well, I don't know. And then we talked several times, and finally the one said, Byron, you have to be right, but I can't accept it, because if I did, I'd have to accept the fact that I wasn't told the truth in college, and I just can't bring myself to believe I went into debt and paid all that funds to go to college and not be told the truth.
Right. It's sort of like, when you bring up that point right there, Byron, it's as if, we're operating and our awareness is the world's flat. The world's flat. That's what we've been taught. The world's flat. However, there's a few people that start to know different. They start to go, I've formed a different thing. Wait, the world's really round. Yet all the navigation systems, everything's all been, and people are beholden to the world's flat. So when you begin to challenge them on that, they go through they go through a series of emotional stages from upset to anger to disbelief on that thing. And so I think that's something what we have to be aware of, that they're going to go through these stages because they've been conditioned otherwise, and that good people who are unconscious, they're unconsciously incompetent.
Mm-hmm. And you get that because Erlon was telling me about, he was talking to a legislator, and he finally admitted he was an economist, and so therefore he didn't believe in a thing we say, and it couldn't work that way because he wasn't taught that way in school. And I don't know a single economist that understands anything about how the monetary system really works, because they're all taught to go on a theory and then create another theory from that theory. And it don't make a difference if the first theory was right or not. In fact, oftentimes in their writing, they admit, well, this doesn't cover all the ramifications, and it's probably not right, but, we're based on that theory, we're going to go here, and then we're going to come out with this conclusion. Well, when you do that, obviously you can't really get to the truth very often of anything.
Right.
And that's the way all your economists are taught, and we're both seeing pretty obviously that's also probably what's been taught in all the colleges about how the courts are supposed to behave and how the sheriffs are supposed to behave, because they've all got to fall into track with what their masters at the top really want them to believe.
Right. Yeah, it's frustrating. It's a long, hard, and that's why I'm potentially hoping, like, for this little bit, that I'm attempting, the weight of the state and the county's coming after me again, and they're trumping up these bogus, misdemeanor charges on me. And this cop who I had a 38-minute dialogue with goes, well, I'm just following orders. I had beaten these charges in Dakota County, And they said, but, to maybe be recharged out in another county. Well, 6 months later, I've got the vindictive judge behind the scenes reawaken him, and this officer in Prior Lake goes, well, I was just told to do it by the prosecutor.
Yeah, never questioned anything.
No, he doesn't. So the point you bring up is that they don't even. And he goes, but I've got this theoretical oath that I'm going to protect your secured rights, and it's like, So he's got to like, where are you going to sit with this guy, or try and educate him, going like, do you realize you're violating your, you've got a contract that you've signed, but now you have this guy telling you who supposedly is an authority figure because you've gone through, 12. 16 years of educational programming to pay attention to outside authorities, not yourself. Not yourself.
Yeah,
so like, you're going to get held accountable here. And so it's like, how do we hold them accountable? And that's, I don't know if this is going to be the answer or not, but I'm going to try this insurance scheme to try and see if I can hold them accountable to see if they start to wake up, if all of a sudden I can hit them for damages of $100,000, $200,000, $500,000, and go bam,
well,
I've tried. Thing. I don't know if that works.
I've tried that, and I think you ought to try it because I never tried to fight that, but I sued a lot of these guys, and it was so obvious they was, the judge was just on their side. In fact, one was really interesting because the lawyer made a mistake, and because he's normally the plaintiff, and so he went to court and moved that the plaintiff's request be all granted, and of course I was the plaintiff on that case, so I made a mistake, and I should have resisted it, and then the judge would have given it to him, but I said, well, I wouldn't argue with that any, and well, they couldn't understand why I was so willing to give up my case. And then he started studying his paperwork because he said, well, something must be wrong here. And then he realized that he had made himself the plaintiff instead of the defendant, which he really was. Oh, and then he got all embarrassed, and he told the judge, well, I made a mistake, blah, blah, blah. Of course, the judge just overlooked his mistake and just threw out the case, which they do most times. They just throw it out, and every judge gets a chance to go to jury trial. And I've even had a jury trial where the judge threw the jury out before they was able to make a decision so that they couldn't rule in my favor. But, the more that we do these things, and especially once you get started in it, then you got to follow through, obviously. And the more we do these kind of shows and tie all of it together, it all comes from the same source, the power that the bankers have through the control of money to get everything they want to go their way. And their way is just everything plus a little bit more. And I got a paper in the mail. I don't know where it came from. It was laying on the counter the other morning when I got up, so Judy must have got it and laid it out. And it clearly was from a labor union here in town, apparently, or a labor union someplace. But it clearly stated that 1% of the population own 40% of all the assets in America. Now, that doesn't leave much for the rest. And then there was another article about how the CEOs and the guys at the top earn more in an hour than most of us earn in a month. And no wonder that little class gets to do anything they want, because they're all connected, and rich people talk to rich people. And they don't give a damn about anybody else, and most of the time they won't even contact them. In fact, when Judy went to work downtown, her boss's boss was a guy I went to high school with. And his cousin is married to my brother. And so Judy went down and talked to him one day, and he said, well, what are you two doing here? And she said, well, we just wanted to know if you recognize this woman. And he looked at her a while and said, well, yeah, she's my cousin, and it's Carol. And so then they talked, but and then he wanted to know what the connection was, and they said, well, we're married to brothers. And we all knew each other. We'd all went to school together. But yet he never once said, well, say hi to Byron or anything else, or made any attempt to contact or anything, because now he was up with the big money boys, and he wasn't interested in anything like that. And you see this happening all the time. So our time is up, and I want to thank everybody for joining here today. I guess it just Greg looked like he got off, and we need to always bring into the power of money in this thing, because that's where it all stems from. If we don't take that power of money away from them guys, it's going to be awful hard to whip all the rest of it. And if you just cut off a little branch here and there, you never kill the plant. You got to get down and dig out that rut. And once we understand that more and more, all of us, and I agree that you have to fight your fight, and you should, because, otherwise they just run over you forever. But it's a tough fight. It takes lots of courage, and a lot of times almost breaks people that do it, too, because all them people went paid for doing everything, and they get paid for it, where you have to put up your own time and put your own bills, and that, again, makes it tough. And their whole theory is that we just got to do this long enough to wear him out, and he'll quit. And, if people don't have the guts themselves to do this en masse, it just becomes very difficult.
Well, that's
I think we should keep working at it, because we don't have any choice. Either that or the country goes down the tubes.
Right.
And we've got to get more people to understand this, and that's why I just agreed to do this program. And it's unbelievable. I can stand in front of an audience and speak with no problem, but doing this kind of stuff to start with, I'm nervous as heck. But I'll get over it, and that's why I like to have you guys come on and help, because if we get tied in this and something goes wrong, the original guests don't show up or something happens. Today it was, I don't know, my fault, I guess. I thought this was an ongoing program. I didn't know I had to go in here every week and update it. But and I thought the other guy understood that too, but apparently he didn't do it either, and so just a total lack of communications, I guess. And again, I work over 40 hours a week, and then do a lot of work at home too. And I get here doing things, and I'll tell you, at my age, I get tired anymore when I put in a 40-hour work week.
Right, I know what you mean.
And I'm quite a little older than you guys are, and been doing this for a lot longer time. But I'm going to try to keep this show going, and I really appreciate you coming in, John, and Erlon's help, because this helps. He's better at this flow and talking than I am, probably, so it helps keep the program moving, and it's going to be better for everybody. And with that, our time is up, and I thank you all for being here today, and I thank all the listeners and all the ones that will watch this on the Constitutional Club website, and hopefully they'll enjoy it and learn from it. And with that, we thank you all, and have a very good afternoon. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right, thanks a lot. Appreciate your work.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.